I had one of those mornings where it was almost like, well, what are we going to call top story today? I could have probably flipped a coin and come up with something. I would have had to do several coin flips because I know I'm not going to get to everything in this stack today. It's a massive stack. I don't have 3 or 4 hours. Wish I did, but if we did that, we'd be interrupting Rush Limbaugh, and I know that there is an element out there that would not stand for that happening. Got to tell you though, right off the top of the show today, since I just pretty much took an approach to, well, let's take something juicy off the stack and open with that. And I wanted to do this. There was a story I saw yesterday afternoon. You know who David Clark is? He's the well known sheriff of Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. He was on a plane flight to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was likely going down there for some sort of consultation on the situation they've had in the streets because of the demands being made by the Black Lives Matter people. And you may remember last week they were all out doing discount shopping because the first thing you do when you see injustice is you go loot and burn Walgreens, right? That's how that's supposed to work. He was on a plane flight, and apparently some drunken passenger recognized him and just berated him on the entire 2-hour flight. The problem is David Clark is a law enforcement officer, and he does have some contacts even in other places, and when the flight landed in Charlotte, the drunk got arrested. Probably has plenty of time to sober up if you're looking at it that way. But I wanted to mention something, and right off the top, I was just doing my little pregame show. I do that on Facebook. People who are actually on my Facebook list of friends can often see me. I try to do this every day before the show for about 10 to 15 minutes where we just do a little preview, talk about some of the things that we've got on the agenda or some things we may not get to but I think are still important. And I referenced the fact that there's a big push going on right now. Hillary Clinton says we need to retrain police in this country. Did you hear that? That's part of her remarks the other night. In other words, to think more like liberals, I suppose. They want to take them off to re-education camps. That's what they used to call it in the Viet Cong called it re-education. The Khmer Rouge called it re-education. The Chinese communists called it re-education. The Soviet communists called. In other words, you're not thinking the way that liberals think you should properly think. So therefore, we need to go reprogram you to do things our way because they're making the assumption right off the top that police officers are just waking up in the morning and salivating at the prospect of shooting brown and black people. As if they can't wait to go out and do it. Like they're, oh, that's 10 points for me. That is truly what the liberals believe out there. And of course, many people in the minority community believe it. When James Comey was being grilled about Hillary's issues yesterday, somebody also asked him about what's going on with this Black Lives Matter movement. Now, James Comey, for those of you liberals out there, he's the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is sometimes known as the FBI. And Comey says all of these people are reacting on anecdotal evidence. In other words, nobody's out there tracking how many shootings. In this day and age, you see a little bit more of this because people are walking around with video cameras on their cell phones. So these videos are now what you would call ubiquitous. That means many, a lot. They're all over the place. But it doesn't mean, perhaps, that things have really changed out there. And some of these videos have gone a great ways to actually exonerate police in these situations. You got a lot of people, though, in these minority communities who just feel that anybody who's shot, even a dope dealer or a guy who's pointing a pistol of his own at police, somehow should be allowed to do that as part of I don't know, the reparations deal, which is where I'm getting in the opening of this program. If you've probably heard this, but the United Nations has come out, and this was a study group, when they get a bunch of people together. The United States pays for most of the operations at the United Nations. We're all aware of that. I mean, Botswana can't afford to do it. Mozambique can't afford to do it. And the North Koreans simply aren't going to pony up any money. They're too busy crucifying all the Christians in their country, so they're spending all the money on what little wood they have left. But the United States really is the country that funds the United Nations, which then turns around and bites the hand that feeds it. So they sat down a committee which made a study, and it did this study for many, many years, 14 years to be exact. In other words, they all sat around in the morning, sipping their orange juice, eating bagels, and having salad at taxpayer expense, and likely getting paid for sitting in the meetings too as well. And they concluded, because of police shootings in America, that the descendants of former slaves need reparations checks. Well, First of all, Barack Obama is not a descendant of a slave. I've got a friend I used to work with. He came here from Nigeria way back in I believe, the early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s. He's not a descendant of a slave. So let's be clear right from the top. Not every American is due a reparations check because of the color of their skin. You're talking about a subset of those people. Now, let's move beyond that. A fellow I know, I met him one day out near his ranch, not too far from the radio station. I was out for a summer drive, oh gosh, summer before last. And he posted on my Facebook page last night. He said, if that's the case, how about reparations for the descendants of all of those Union troops who fought the Civil War to help overturn the institution of slavery? And as long as we're at it, I was mentioning in my little pregame video on Facebook this morning, I have some Irish ancestry in my family. Well, actually, it comes down from two sides. My grandfather's side on my dad's father, and my grandmother's side on my mother's family. Did you know that, and I was just reading up on this because I'm thinking about a Caribbean vacation, and I was reading up on places like St. Thomas and St. Croix and even some of the islands owned by Great Britain that are down in the Caribbean, which look to be lovely vacation spots, I should point out, that a great many of these countries, part of the mix with the Creole and the indigenous population and the African population, a lot of these people have big, long strains of Irish DNA. Why is that? Well, following the era of Oliver Cromwell, and then going on for a couple of centuries, there were land clearances in Ireland, and a great many people, including Irish children, were just scooped up and sold as slaves to work in the fields of the Caribbean. Many were also sent to Nova Scotia. Others were sent to the east coast of what became the United States. So these were people who, by our definition, would be white people who were sold into slavery. And then their descendants, I would assume, could also make a claim that they're somehow deserving reparations. Now, how about somebody who feels their feelings have been hurt all of their lives? I was just reading this morning. The lawyer who was representing the school district in Detrick, Idaho, is trying now to cover up a report that was released on Monday. You may know the story. It's about a young man. He is black, and he's adopted by a local family, but he is, well, what we used to call years ago, it's not politically correct anymore, he would be called slow. And he was allegedly assaulted by some of the other students who are white in the school district. Well, having been through high school myself, and most of you did the same thing, you know there's a lot of mean, rotten, rude people in high school. There are a lot of cliques in high school, and people do a lot of bullying. I mean, it's part of what growing up was like in this country. This report from the school district discovered that bullying is rampant in the school district. It's not just this one case, but bullying is rampant in the school district. So don't all of those kids who've been bullied deserve some sort of reparations check? On the other hand, if you've been treated poorly at work, maybe your boss yelled at you one day and you felt it wasn't fair, maybe you deserve a reparations check. Where does this come to an end? And after the federal treasury, my friends, is not full. I mean, we've got 19 to 20 trillion dollars officially in federal debt in this country. We haven't scratched the surface on the debts owed by state governments and the responsibilities and unfunded liabilities that the state governments have. And yet somehow everybody thinks they're going to get a big fat check, and that will somehow make their lives better? How is that going to make your life better? I've known people who've won the lottery. Not many, but I've met a few. And from what I can see, for the most part, it hasn't done anything for them. We have a caller with us. It's 816. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 57. 816 now. We're going to move that time up just a wee bit. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. You know, I think the biggest problem with our society today is they're too lazy to go out and earn their own money. They got to try and steal it from somebody else. And you're right about these checks and stuff. And then Congress passes this deal where we can sue the Saudi Arabia government, which is going to open our government and everything else to lawsuits. This is the one time I do agree with Obama. This is going to create a huge issue. And the black people should actually get a referendum check from the Muslims that actually put them into slavery to begin with.
Yeah, if you go back into to the slaving days, going back into the 16 and 1700s, a lot of your Muslim kings throughout Africa were basically grabbing captives, throwing them on boats, and shipping them off to quote the New World for profit. That in itself is a huge crime that doesn't get addressed. It seems to be we only blame one side in all of this. I thank you very much for the telephone call. We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on Top Story on KLIX.
Yeah, hello.
Sure, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, just listening to you on the incident over in Dietrich, Idaho. Like Paul Harvey said, the rest of the story, the way I hear it from family members over there, is that this young black kid was, I guess you call it changing your gender identity, and was going into the bathrooms and watching the girls take showers and watching them do their stuff and taking off his clothes and trying to touch him and saying all kinds of nasty things. So I don't think that's correct for what the boys did, but everybody needs to know the rest of the story.
Well, and I don't know that the full story either, and I thank you for the call. And I have not heard those details, but it wouldn't surprise me that would get overlooked and when I say overlooked, perhaps intentionally by mainstream media in the state of Idaho, because a poor black boy being picked on by a bunch of white kids, that's a much better story than perhaps, if indeed it's true, there's a transgender student. But see, if he's a transgender student, then of course he can be a victim twice. He not only can be a black victim, but he could be a transgender victim. I don't mean to impugn anything here because I'm not close to the story, and I don't want to say that I know all of the details because we have had so few that have actually been released because we're dealing with kids. They're not all kids. Some of them are 18, which is why some of them are going to be in serious trouble if they're ever convicted in this situation. But I'm telling you right now, it would not surprise me in any way that media would self-censor itself if it felt that it would take away from the narrative that the people in media would like to tell. Not only on the state level, but you've got to look at what media does nationwide, and I think we can be pretty clear on all of this. We're not getting the whole story or the rest of the story, as the caller mentioned, on a great many things that are going. There's a story today in the Daily Caller, and you will not likely see it reported over at MSDNC or in the big East Coast newspapers. But this fellow Pagliano, who's been defying the U.S. House of Representatives and the Clinton email scandal, it appears that Bill Clinton in his tax returns claimed he made some charitable deductions or donations from the Clinton Foundation, but in fact, these may have been payments of hush money to this fellow. And yet, where are all of your friends in mainstream media? And how many of them are telling you that this beauty contestant Hillary's whining about may have been involved in an attempt to murder a judge in Venezuela? Again, they don't want you to know certain things. They bury it. We've got more coming up. Just taking a look at the Drudge report because a friend of mine said there is some speculation that the train crash in Hoboken, New Jersey this morning. Now, 3 people are known to be dead, possibly 100 injured, and apparently the train never slowed down before it stopped. The only thing that stopped it, essentially hitting a wall or a barrier. And I think it's a little too early to speculate on the possibility of terrorism, but my friend grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so grew up relatively close to that scene, and his father and uncle were Philadelphia police officers. And so when he sees something like this, his radar goes up, and you take into account all potential possibilities in a situation like this. And he is suggesting that it is perhaps it's not completely beyond the realm of possibility a terrorist could have attacked a conductor, taken over the train, and then just decided to plow it into a wall. That story obviously is developing as we speak, and if we get more on it this morning, I'll share that with you too as well. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX this morning with Bill Colley. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Bill, I have Hungarian friends and relatives that were slaves behind the Iron Curtain. Some were German Hungarians, and they had it real bad by the Russians. Why should people that came over here from behind the Iron Curtain that were slaves have to pay reparations to people that were never slaves?
That's a good question. In fact, they ought to be asking Vladimir Putin when they can get their reparations, or maybe the German government. And the United Nations is saying that the United States should pay all these bills, when in fact, as I pointed out, we're funding the United Nations, and yet the United Nations doesn't seem to think that people who've been oppressed throughout the world and other places are owed a check. Somehow there's a belief that even though our country is trillions of dollars in debt and has been defending the rest of the world for 70 years now, 75 years, that somehow we can just keep going back to the well and, grabbing another bucket for everybody else to drink from, and it's not there any longer. That is not a paid political advertisement for Donald Trump, but it could be because he made that same inference the other night during the debate. Got to tell you quickly during our segment of the program, before we move along too much along here, I wanted to mention my friend Dr. Eric F. Jones, who is using a holistic, systemic approach to wellness. In this day and age, a lot of us are trying to avoid just getting into the system because all they do is they prescribe all sorts of pharmaceuticals for you. And do we really want to walk around being drugged up zombies all the time? A lot of people don't, and they're returning to more traditional forms of medicine. Dr. Jones has been in practice now for nearly a quarter century with master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy, and he uses methods of alternative healing such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self-regulation, and napathy, those to help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. He's currently accepting new patients, evening and weekend appointments. Well, we should say Saturday. He does try to reserve Sunday for more important things. Those appointments are available. Telephone number 731-7178, and Dr. Jones is on Facebook at Eric F. Jones, PhD, mental health and wellness therapist, and that's Eric with a C. Got a break coming up in a couple of minutes. We're going to two other things this morning I wanted to mention. Talk a little bit about some safety issues, law enforcement issues coming up in just a few minutes. And then in the next half hour, we're going to be joined in studio for a few minutes by Ray Parrish. Now, Ray's one of those guys I could bring him in to talk something serious. He could talk about things like banking. He's got some great expertise there, but he's actually talking about an event that is designed to help people in this community. And it's a yearly event that involves the Kiwanis Club, and he's going to share some of the details with that just after 9 o'clock news this morning. Also, he's a close friend of our school superintendent here in Twin Falls, who after decades in the education industry has announced he's retiring. And, well, if I was working over there too and had to put up with all of that, I probably would have been gone a long time ago. But he is going to share some thoughts perhaps with us on that too. Details ahead, as I say, coming up in just a short while this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And the show is Top Story with Bill Colley. Right now it's 58. Before we get to the next break, I just wanted to mention this if I could. Daily Caller, we were talking about how this culture has gotten so insanely out of control. Speaking of schools, more than 500 school districts around the country are taking a pledge to pronounce each and every student's name correctly because a host of leftist education groups has decided that mispronouncing students' names amounts to a microaggression. Earlier this month, Rita Colley, she pronounces it Colley, it's actually Kohli, no relation, an education professor at the University of California, Riverside, pontificated that the microaggression of mispronouncing a student's name can actively thwart the learning process. Having grown up in a school system where my teachers would teach us all the lessons, when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking, you would have thought they would have been able to pronounce names. But throughout my life, even though there's one vowel followed by two consonants, people still would say Cooley or Colley, which is not entirely incorrect because somewhere way, way back in the Gaelic spelling and speaking of it on the coast of Western Ireland, it was Gilcooley. How it got to be what it is today is beyond me, but a lot of these names were anglicized. Birth registrars just simply couldn't understand a Galway accent. But it didn't warp me by any means. The only problem I had was when they sat us alphabetically and they put me down next to Carl Bassett. Yeah, I'm glad the guy behind me wasn't a dachshund. It was terrible. I deserve some sort of reparations for that. We're going to talk a little law enforcement on the way with the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in just a moment. It's 8:30. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. 57 right now.